and when we solve them, it's a little bit like when we're sketching them and looking for where they cross the x-axis. We have to factorize them or use the formula in order to be able to solve them. So if I was to do this without, then I would take the x squared minus 8x and I might add or subtract 15 to both sides. But the problem is I'm always going to end up with these two values of x and I will never be able to kind of group them together. So I could take the 8x to the other side as well. But I've now got an x on this side and on this side, and I'm going to kind of keep going around in circles. I won't be able to solve it. Okay, so the only way to solve it, and if you do find something like that happening, is to factorize. So in this particular one, the first one, it's a 1x squared. So it's a nice and simple. We're just saying what times is together to make 15 and adds together to make, what times is together to make 15 and what adds together to make minus 8. So I know that my brackets are x and x. So things that times together to make 15, 1 and 15, 3 and 5, and there we go, that should have 8. Okay, that's got a connection to 8 if I'm either adding or subtracting them. So I know that I'm going to have 5 and 3, and I want them to times together to make a positive and add together to make a negative, so they're both going to need to be negative. So now that I've factorized it, I have essentially two numbers there. This number times by this number equals 0. So one of those numbers has to be 0. So either x minus 3 is equal to 0 or x minus 5 is equal to 0. So now I can just rearrange them. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides of this one. So x is equal to 3. And now I've solved it. And then the second one, I'm going to add 5 to both sides. So x is equal to 5. So my solutions to the quadratic are x is equal to 3 or x is equal to 5. I have two solutions. Looking at the second one, again, it's a nice simple quadratic with a 1x squared at the front. So I'm going to look for what times is together to make 10 and adds together to make 11. So I have 1 and 10, 2 and 5, and I can see there it's the 1 and 10 that's going to give me 11 if I add or subtract them. So it's a nice simple quadratic again, just two brackets with x and it's equal to 0. Okay, now it has to be equal to 0 to do this. If this wasn't equal to 0, then you would need to add or subtract to get everything on one side to then make it equal to 0 so that you can then solve it. Okay, that's very important. So we're now going to place that 1 and 10 into the bracket. And we can see that it's positive 1 and positive 10 because it times us to make a positive and adds to make 11. So my solution is that either the number x plus 1 is equal to 0. So if I subtract 1 from both sides, x is equal to minus 1. Or x plus 10 is equal to 0. So if I subtract 10 from both sides, x is equal to minus 10. And they are my two solutions to my quadratic. So we often get two solutions, but not always. Sometimes it might be one, where it's repeated in both the brackets. And sometimes it might actually not be any solutions, where it's hovering above the x-axis. So the last one here is a little bit harder because we have the 9. Okay, so it's not just a simple x and x in the bracket. So for this one, I'm having to say what times is together to make 9 times 25, which is 225, and what adds together to make 30. Now that one's quite a tricky one, so you might want to use your calculator to help you find the factors. So you could divide it by 1, divide it by 2, divide it by 3, and so on, and find the factors of 225. Now, 225 is actually 15 times 15. And 15 times 15 adds to make 30. So in this situation, it's 15 and 15. So I'm now going to rewrite my whole equation. If you remember doing this earlier. plus 15x plus 15x. So I'm replacing that middle term with the two terms that I've just found. Okay, so all I've done there is replace this 30 with the two 15s that I found here. And now I'm going to split that question in half. Okay, so I'm going to split this in half, and I have 3 that I can take out as a factor and x that I can take out as a factor, and I'm left with 3x plus 3 plus 5, sorry. So 3x plus 5. And then on the other side, I can take out 5 as a factor, or positive 5, and I'm left with 3x plus 5 as a factor. Okay, and that's all still equal to 0. So now I know that when I factorize it, I have the bit outside the brackets, so the 3x plus 5, and then the bit in the brackets, which is the 3x plus 5, and that's still all equal to 0. So now that I've factorized it, I can take this side, and I know that this has to equal 0. So if I subtract 5 from both sides, and then I can divide by 3, so minus 5 over 3, and you can leave it as a fraction. And then I do the same here, so 3x plus 5 equals to 0, so 3x equals to minus 5, and x is equal to minus 5 over 3. And it makes sense that they would be the same because the brackets were the same. And this is where we have one solution, or a repeated solution. So we actually only have one solution because both of the brackets gave me the same number, okay? So if I was to sketch that one, it would come down and just gently touch at one point only, okay? So whenever we're sketching, whenever we're solving, we always need to make sure that we're factorizing first, and the golden rule is to make sure that it equals to 0. On each of these, it equal to 0 first. If it doesn't, make it equal to 0 before you start the question.